We finally solved the John Denver mystery, and it's bad. John Denver was born Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. on December 31, 1943 in Roswell, New Mexico, raised in a military family under the steady shadow of a father who flew with the U.S. Air Force. His earliest years marked by base housing and cardboard boxes that never stayed sealed for long drives that stitched together prairies, deserts, coastlines, and mountain ranges, until the map itself felt like a second home. That constant motion shaped him in two directions at once, a tug of rootlessness that made him wonder where he truly belonged, and a growing reverence for the American landscape that offered him a kind of belonging larger than any street address. He carried memories of dawn light on highways and the hush of pine air after rain, of sky so big it made worry feel small, and in those impressions the seeds of his songwriting were already there. The idea that nature can be a mirror for the heart and that wide-open places can teach you how to breathe again. Military schedules taught discipline and patience, while the move to a new town taught how to read a room fast, how to make friends with a tune and a smile. He learned that when roots are shallow, you can grow them sideways into people and places, that a packed suitcase can be a promise instead of a threat, and that the sound of tires on a night road can turn into rhythm when you learn to listen closely. His love for music woke up early and found its form the day his grandmother placed a guitar in his hands at age 11, a simple wooden gift that seemed to hum with possibility. He learned chords by feel and memory, copying records until the shapes became instinct. Elvis Presley on one side of the turntable and the gentler pulse of 1960s folk on the other. He listened for how a melody carries a story, and how a story turns into a chorus you can live inside. At Texas Tech University, he kept shaping that voice, playing where he could and learning what reached people and what did not. Then came the decision that sets a life in motion, a move to Los Angeles to chase songs in the only way that matters, by writing them and singing them for anyone who will listen. He chose the name Denver in honor of Colorado's capital and the mountains that felt like truth to him, a name that sounded like the place he kept seeing when he closed his eyes. In 1969, he wrote Leaving on a Jet Plane and handed it into the world. Peter, Paul, and Mary carried it to a major hit, and the success told him something simple and huge, that his writing could travel farther than he could. Soon he stepped into the spotlight as a performer in his own right, and the 1970s opened to a run of songs that seemed to belong to every kitchen and every car ride. Take Me Home, Country Roads, Annie's Song, Rocky Mountain High, Sunshine on My Shoulders, Thank God I'm a Country Boy. Each one a door into a feeling you already knew but could not name until he sang it. He honed arrangements in small clubs and coffee houses before those same songs filled theaters, learning mic distance and breath control, and the quiet art of letting a room settle before the first note. He found out that clarity carries farther than volume, that an honest lyric beats a clever one when the lights go low, and that if you give an audience a picture they can see, they will sing it back to you with their whole chest. Those records were more than charts and applause. They were little rooms people could walk into and find themselves again. The sound was a blend that felt inevitable once you heard it. Folk warmth meeting country earth with a touch of pop clarity. Arrangements that left space for air and light. Finger-picked guitar, banjo when it fit, fiddle that rose like a line of morning sun, and always his tenor voice at the center, steady and welcoming. The phrasing careful without feeling careful. The words simple without feeling thin. You could hear craft in the choices and kindness in the delivery. He did not push to be heard. He invited you closer. And because of that invitation, his songs traveled across borders and generations. They worked on AM radios and stage monitors in living rooms with the lights dimmed low. And they kept working years later when listeners needed the same reassurance in different seasons of their lives. The choruses were built like footpaths you could follow, even when life felt overgrown. The verses carried the smell of wood smoke and rain, and the bridges arrived like a turn in the trail that shows you a valley you did not know you were climbing toward. The music offered comfort without closing its eyes to sorrow. The tempo sat in that human pocket where a heartbeat can match the strum. And that balance is why people kept returning to it when they needed steady ground and a hand to hold in the dark. John Denver's ease on stage translated to the screen with the same natural glide. In 1977, he stepped into Oh God opposite George Burns and showed how sincerity can be as compelling as bravado. The film found an audience because it balanced gentle humor with a clean line of wonder, and his presence made that balance believable. On television, he became a familiar guest and host, building specials across the 1970s that felt less like events and more like visits. He spoke plainly, performed without pretense, and made a living room feel like a front row seat. The camera trusted him because he never forced it, and viewers trusted him because he never asked them to be anything but themselves. He could carry a punchline with a smile and then land a song with quiet force, an entertainer whose range widened without losing the center that made people lean in. Behind the scenes, he worked with arrangers and house bands to shape medleys that flowed. He rehearsed transitions so jokes and songs shared breath. He welcomed guests not as props but as partners, and his specials became seasonal rituals for families who measured time by the songs that returned each year. Holiday broadcasts turned into mile markers, and by the final credits you felt less like a spectator and more like a neighbor who had stayed a little longer on the porch. Even with the pull of film and television, he kept recording into the 1990s, keeping faith with the folk and country roots that shaped him while letting his work reflect a widening sense of purpose. The music and the message braided together. He used tours and interviews and songs to speak for rivers, forests, and the wildlife that threads them together. He believed that conservation and common sense live side by side, that sustainable choices are not abstractions but daily decisions. His curiosity lifted his gaze beyond the horizon line. Space exploration stirred him because it echoed the human instinct to learn and to keep reaching. He supported NASA and the programs that turn questions into missions. And when the public debate around music censorship grew loud, he carried his case to the United States Congress, arguing for creative freedom in the same steady tone he used to introduce a ballad, making the point that songs are vessels for truth and connection, and that narrowing those vessels narrows us. On stage, he often framed a ballad with a story about the river that inspired it or the people who lived alongside it, using the silence between songs to make space for the why behind the melody, a teacher's patience in a performer's body, and a traveler's curiosity that made every theater feel like a town he had known for years. Colorado stood at the center of his story, like a mountain on a clear day. He chose Aspen as home for much of his adult life, because those ridgelines matched the way his heart beat. The town gave him community and quiet, trails that reset the mind and winters that made the wood stove glow brighter. It was more than a residence. It was an engine for renewal and a workshop in the open air. In 1974, he was named Colorado's official poet laureate, a nod from the place he celebrated so often, and Rocky Mountain High became the shorthand for that bond. In 2007, the state adopted it as one of its songs, a formal way of saying what fans already knew in their bones, that his music held the spirit of that landscape with unusual clarity. His reach extended east as well. Take Me Home Country Roads became an anthem for West Virginia, and in 2014 the state embraced it officially. Proof that his way of writing about place could connect across lines on a map and across differences in people's lives. A reminder that home is sometimes the road that leads back to what you love. Mornings in Aspen meant coffee steam meeting cold air on a porch, and afternoons meant a notebook in a jacket pocket on a trail. Neighbors knew him not as a headline but as a man who waved from a bicycle and showed up for a school fundraiser with a guitar case in hand. The town gave him the gift every artist craves, a place to disappear and return without fanfare. Service lived alongside stagecraft in his choices. He founded the WinStar Foundation and pointed it at environmental education and sustainable living. He carried UNICEF's banner and gave his time to causes that asked for hunger to be answered with action, and for conflict to be answered with care. When he hosted television specials, the Advocacy was never a lecture. It was a thread you could feel in the way he framed a song or introduced a guest. The project said something simple, that entertainment and empathy are not opposites, that a show can leave an audience humming and also leave them thinking about the world just beyond their front door. He kept showing up in formats that fit the moment, and in each one the same steady current ran underneath, a belief that attention is a kind of love, and that art can teach us how to pay better attention. He visited classrooms and community halls where kids strummed borrowed guitars and learned that a chorus can carry a message farther than a poster. The work moved quietly and steadily the way roots knit soil after a rain, and the people who met him up close remembered not the spotlight, but the way he listened without looking over a shoulder. In 1967, he married Annie Martell and built a private world that would feed the public songs. Their partnership arrived as his career found its lift and gave him ballast when the wind picked up. Annie's song came fast on a ski lift in Colorado, a rush of gratitude that turned into melody almost by itself. Proof that the most durable work sometimes arrives when the heart is open and the mind gets out of the way. From 1968 to 1971, they lived in Edina, Minnesota, a quieter chapter that set the stage for the mountain years to come. A camping trip with Annie and friends lit the spark that became Rocky Mountain High, and after that he bought a home in Aspen, a place he would return to again and again for the rest of his life. They grew their family through adoption, welcoming Zachary John and Anna Kate, and he spoke of fatherhood as the part of his life that needed no applause to feel complete. The song "A Baby Just Like You" folded that love into a gentle holiday wish, with his son's name shining like a lantern in the lyric. The music and the family feeding each other in a circle that felt right. Dinners around a crowded table turned into impromptu harmonies. Bedtime meant a guitar leaning against a chair and a lullaby that turned a house quiet one verse at a time. The ordinary rituals became the seams that held fast when the world outside grew loud. Fame can stretch even the strongest bonds thin. By 1982, the marriage had reached its end. The demands of touring and a calendar that did not forgive made closeness harder to protect. In a 1983 interview later included in the documentary, John Denver Country Boy, released in 2013, he reflected on how the grind drove a wedge they could not bridge, no matter how much they cared. Annie later said they had been too young and unprepared for the velocity of change his success brought. Their split carried a moment of raw symbolism that stuck in the public imagination. The marital bed cut in half with a chainsaw to mark the division of property. It read like a headline, but it landed like a sigh, a reminder that a gentle public image can still carry private storms, and that even those who write the tenderest songs sometimes have to learn hard lessons at home. Friends remember how he kept working while trying to keep the center steady for the children, learning the choreography of shared calendars and learning how to arrive with presents even when he was only home for a handful of days at a time. The music stayed kind while the living got complicated, and that contrast left its trace in the quieter corners of his later shows. He found love again with Cassandra Delaney, an Australian actress. After a 2-year courtship, they married in 1988 and settled in Aspen. Their daughter Jessie Bell enlarged the circle of his fatherhood and brought new light into a house already full of music. But the marriage did not hold. Separation came in 1991 and the divorce in 1993. He spoke about the hurt with a frankness that surprised some, admitting he felt made a fool of across the valley he adored. Not as spectacle, but as a man trying to name the bruise. That honesty showed a more complicated texture than the stage smile, a reminder that the person who sings about love also wrestles with its losses, that the songs and the life are connected but not identical, and that resilience is sometimes the quietest part of a story. He poured energy into parenting through the changes, showing up for school events with the same focus he brought to a sound check, learning new routines one morning at a time, stitching back a sense of home with pancakes, backpacks, and the drive to First Bell. Then the day that changed every headline arrived, October 12, 1997. John Denver took off in an experimental aircraft called the Rutan Long-EZ over the California coast. A routine flight that turned unfamiliar in a handful of moments. Early talk divided blame between pilot error and mechanical failure, a simple split that never satisfied anyone who knew how small decisions and small design details can combine into large consequences in the air. Investigators traced the chain and found the critical link. The fuel selector valve sat in the wrong position and starved the engine. Power dropped away, options narrowed, and the aircraft went into the Pacific. A sequence that can unfold faster than training can feel when altitude is shallow and the shoreline is a line you cannot quite reach. Coastal air shimmered and the horizon drew a thin, hard line, a place where seconds matter and checklists live not on paper but in hands that must remember without hesitation. The water below turning from backdrop to boundary, in a breath. Deeper review added context that made the story harder, not easier. The airplane's configuration had quirks not fully grasped by every pilot who climbed into that seat. Control placement that asked for muscle memory that was not yet there. Safety features that offered too little margin when seconds mattered. Reports indicated that he had spoken about fuel system concerns before the flight and had not received guidance or repairs that might have changed the outcome. What looks like a single mistake becomes, under that light, a cluster of risks aligning at once. Training gaps meeting design gaps meeting communication gaps. The kind of convergence that aviation works so hard to prevent and that still sometimes threads the needle when luck and planning fail at the same time. Human factors live in the inches between a hand and a switch, in the way labels read under stress, in the way a cockpit invites or confuses a pilot under pressure. And when the mind reaches for a habit that is not there, the clock moves faster than thought. Around the same period, his private life carried added weight. The public saw the bright performances and the environmental work, but behind those stages, he carried stress from years in the spotlight and the aftershocks of divorce. Some accounts describe bouts of depression and the kind of restless heaviness that can blunt judgment. Rumors about substances circulated, as they often do when a famous person falls, yet no confirmed evidence tied drugs or alcohol to that flight. What remains when the noise is pared away is a human picture. A careful pilot facing an unforgiving moment in an unforgiving machine. A perfect storm of technical failure and human vulnerability. A reminder that in the cockpit as in life, tiny margins separate routine from disaster, and that respect for those margins must be relentless. Flying had often been a solace for him, a way to trade crowded rooms for open sky. And the irony of that comfort turning so quickly into crisis gives the story its lasting ache, a quiet truth that grief does not erase skill. It only shows how thin the edge can be. The truth complicates the way we hold his legacy. Not to dim the songs, but to sharpen the outline of the person who made them. Critics point out that better training, clearer labeling, and more rigorous inspection for experimental aircraft could have widened his safety margin. That the industry's approach to home-built and non-standard designs must include teaching the quirks as seriously as teaching the basics. That responsibility sits not only with the pilot, but with the systems that authorized and supported the flight. The conversation reaches beyond one crash to a larger question about how we balance innovation with protection, how we invite curiosity to fly without asking it to pay a price it never agreed to pay. In the end, the call is for humility in design and humility in instruction, for a culture that treats every near miss as a lesson and every loss as a mandate to do better, and for a habit of speaking plainly about risk so that clarity replaces bravado where it matters most. The resolution to the John Denver mystery is not catharsis, it is a caution that points in two directions at once. Toward the aviation community, it says, keep your standards high and your communication clearer than clear. Make checklists and training that anticipate confusion before panic can start. Design and retrofit cabins so that critical controls are intuitive even under stress. Toward listeners, it says, hold space for the human limits inside the artist you love. Recognize that a generous voice can come from a tired heart, and that the people who help us feel steady are susceptible to the same sudden turns that touch every life. Fame is an amplifier, not a shield. And physics does not care who is in seat one. Memory honors truth best when it refuses to flatten a complex life into a single headline, and when it chooses patience over judgment so lessons can take root instead of hardening into blame. In the years since his passing, his story has fueled fresh advocacy for better pilot education and stronger oversight of light and experimental aircraft. Flight schools and clubs have turned the lessons into exercises, emphasizing fuel management drills and emergency practice that make muscle memory a friend rather than a stranger. Inspectors and builders talk more directly about ergonomic risk and about labeling that leaves no room for guesswork. The push is for a humility in design and instruction that treats every preventable accident as an unfinished homework assignment, a way of honoring those lost by lowering the odds that someone else's name will join the list. Those quiet reforms are a second kind of legacy that sits beside the records and the reruns, a living memorial made of checklists and habits and decisions that keep families from getting the call no one wants. Culture shifts when stories turn into standards and when standards turn into habits that live in the hands of people who fly, and each safer landing is a small candle lit in the wind. Step back and the whole arc comes into view. A boy who learned to find home in the shape of a horizon. A young songwriter who gave others a hit before winning the world with his own name. A voice that sounded like sun through a kitchen window. A screen presence that made an auditorium feel neighborly. An advocate who used attention to point at rivers, forests, children, and the stars above them. A husband and father who loved deeply even when the living of that love grew hard. And at the end, a pilot whose last flight reminds us that details matter, and that safety is not a mood but a discipline. The mystery is solved, but the feeling it leaves is not relief. It is a steady clarity that asks for care, vigilance, and respect for the small choices that keep people safe and allow art to keep arriving. That is how memory does its best work, by carrying forward the lessons as carefully as we carry the songs, and by returning to the music when we need to remember what steadiness sounds like. If this kind of clear-eyed storytelling speaks to you, follow and subscribe for more deep dives. Share this episode with someone who loves the music and the truth behind it.